G'day, it's Nigel here. Welcome back to the Sax School Online Podcast. If you're an adult sax learner that really wants to get more out of your playing, then you're definitely in the right place, because today we're digging into the most common mistakes that we see adult learners make, and that's after teaching thousands of students over the past decade. Now, perhaps you're also making some of these mistakes, so listen in closely, because let me tell you, these mistakes, they're definitely holding back your progress. And today, we're going to be talking you through how to avoid them, but most importantly, we're going to be sharing some strategies that you can use to keep your sax playing and progress right on track. So joining me today are Fred Vigda and Joel Purnell from the Sax School Tutor team. We've got loads to dig into. How are you getting on, Joel?
Very well, thank you. How are you doing? Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm doing great. And what about you, Fred? You doing well too?
I'm doing excellently. Thank you very much for asking.
Good. I'm a little concerned talking to you about this, Fred, because I don't think you actually make any mistakes.
Well, I'm here right now, so there you go.
All right. Well, I know we've got a lot of these things to talk about today, because these are things that come up all the time, right? So, Joel, what do you think's the first? Like, if you had to categorize this, what do you think is the one that really comes up most commonly?
I think focusing on the wrong things is something that tends to come up quite a lot. I mean, whether that's, let's say that you want to play jazz, and that's the thing you want to do, and you dive straight in with pentatonic shifting because you think it sounds great and it sounds interesting and stuff like that. It's not going to happen. Everything in life is a progression. So you can think of it, I like to think of it like learning to build an engine. You're not just going to kind of start chucking all the complicated bits together and hope it comes out. You've got to start at the beginning. You've got to think about the frame and the basics, and you've got to learn it from the bottom up to the top, and it's really important. And obviously, we all get impatient. Everyone gets impatient, and you really want to get there as quick as you can, but the fundamentals just can't be overlooked, so definitely get some advice from Sax School or a good teacher, and make sure you do what they say, because they know what they're doing. They've gone through these same struggles as well, and have realised the hard way that jumping on too fast and moving on to stuff that you're not ready for actually doesn't do you any favours in the long run.
I completely agree with you. I think it's particularly a struggle for adult sax learners. So we deal with, we help thousands of adult sax players. That's really what we do at Sax School. And the thing is, if you're an adult saxophone learner, you're on social media. You're watching all those YouTube videos, getting all those different advices from all those different people. Hey, how difficult is it to avoid following some new, exciting, complicated technique that you've seen on Instagram or YouTube? It's just, of course, we're all going to do it, right? But yeah, absolutely. That I think is a massive hurdle, Joel. So yeah, a great one to mention. But also, as an adult learner, you're generally, like you said, Joel, a little bit less patient as well. So you want to run off and get to do all that fancy, complicated things as fast as possible. Important thing to be focused with your structure, absolutely. But Fred, what about, getting onto that social media thing? Do you think that presents other problems for adult learners as well?
Yeah, I'm just wondering how many of these topics that we broached today I'm going to be guilty of, because I'm definitely guilty of the first one for sure. Even now, always getting ahead of over my skis, as I say. Yeah, the other thing that social media, for all the good that it does us, it can be really difficult, because you hear even in Sax School, you hear all the other members and you think, oh, they're doing, they're already here and I've been playing longer than them, and why aren't I at that level, or why can't I do what that person can do? And man, I am extremely guilty of that as well. And you have to it's one of the evils of social media, just in general. People are always putting up their best. You don't hear how many times it took them to get it right. First of all, you're not witnessing all of the trial and error to get their finished product up there. So you have to take that in consideration as well. But the only person that you should be competing with is the person you were yesterday. That's it. Don't worry about anybody else. And believe me, I am extremely guilty of this. I'm always thinking, why I've been playing for all these years. Why can't I do what Joel can do, or what Nigel can do? I'm so guilty of that. Even at the ripe old age of, so don't hold yourself accountable to yourself and nobody else, and don't worry about what anybody else is doing and how anybody else is getting on. It's not a competition.
Yeah, I hear you, Fred. Don't worry. I think we both, you and I, struggle with that anxiety of never being able to play as well as Joel. I'm coming to terms with it, though. It's just going to be a reality,
I've resigned myself to the fact that I'm never going to be there. So
I think the interesting thing as well is, especially if you come into it a little bit later in life, and let's say you've had a successful career as a banker, and you've run a hedge fund, I don't know, or something complicated like that. You've got to kind of compare it to that progression. Even though you've got really far in another career, you didn't just suddenly start as a hedge fund manager. You probably were a teller in a bank for a little bit, and then you moved up the thing. There's a progression to things. So that comparison thing as well. Remember, you're comparing yourself to Warren Buffett. It's a long way away. There's a natural progression that needs to be followed, and you've got to take all those steps if you want to get there. And if you do, there's no reason you won't get there. It just takes time and a bit of patience.
Yeah, the patience is the challenge, though, when you're an adult learner, because, like you say, there's a lot of people that we help in Sax School who do come from successful professional careers, and then they've got to get back to the basics again, and be patient with that progress. And going on social media and watching other people, it's really hard to not fall into that trap. To be honest with you, my social feed is flooded with saxophone players, and I don't like to spend that much time on there for that reason, because even I've been playing forever. I still, it's hard to not fall into that little trap of, they can do that. They can play those high notes. They can do all that sort of improvising. So the point I'm trying to make is it affects people at all levels. So it's just one of those things to be aware of. Yeah. I tell you, another thing that I see a lot of people start learning with this, a mistake that they make is, it's kind of associated with this actually, is choosing the wrong gear to get started with. Now, as an adult learner, most of us are into gear. We're into mouthpieces and saxophones, and we're flooded these days with suggestions of the sort of gear to get, and possibly you might be in a situation where you can afford to have a couple of different mouthpieces or a couple of different saxophones. So it's tempting to experiment with your gear. However, particularly at the early stages of playing, having the wrong gear can really hold you back. So what I mean by wrong gear is things like, a saxophone needs to be in great playing order. So a vintage saxophone is great, but if it doesn't play well, it's not really going to help you. So make sure, whether it's a used modern saxophone or whether it's an older saxophone, you get it checked out and make sure the saxophone plays well. That should be a basic sort of minimum requirement. But the most common thing really is mouthpieces and reeds and the combination of those two. So it can be really tempting to go and grab that shiny metal mouthpiece with a big wide opening that sounds really edgy in the shop, but actually it can be really difficult to control, probably quite antisocial if you're playing it in a concert band as well. So you're better off to stick with something that's a bit more middle of the road and a softer reed setup that's going to allow you to work up your embouchure and develop a tone. Do you see that at the conservatoire where you teach, Joel?
Yeah, definitely. I remember a very quick story, but I used to have a guy that came in every week many years ago. He used to come in with this silver briefcase. I never really asked him about it. But the one thing I did notice is every week he came in and he had problems with his tone. And every time I kind of looked at his saxophone, it looked a bit different. It was like every week he had a different mouthpiece. I don't know how he afforded it, to be quite honest, but one day I asked him what was in the silver case and he opened it and there must have been £60,000 worth of mouthpieces in there.
Wow.
I've never seen anything like it. There was about 40 mouthpieces, guardalas and limited edition things, and suddenly it all made sense. You've got to settle on something as well. I think that's an important thing. As long as it works, think of it like cars. When you get your first car, It just needs to be reliable and get you from A to B. That's all you need, and as you progress and you want a bit more luxury, or you decide what you want, actually I want a stick drive manual, not an automatic, then you've already had the experience to make those decisions, and then it's the right time to make those decisions. So yeah, I see it a lot, and obviously students come into the conservatoire with a shiny new saxophone they've been bought before they get there, but maybe they haven't played it beforehand and it actually doesn't suit them, or the keys are too big for their hands, or it's too heavy and stuff. So you've got to play things and just find something that feels nice, get started on it, and as you get to know your saxophone better and your own playing, you realise the nuances of other saxophones that you might want. You try them out, and if it works for you, you get it. If it doesn't, you've probably got the best thing for you at the moment.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I don't know about you, Fred, but for a long, long time, like decades, I only ever had two mouthpieces, an alto mouthpiece and a tenor mouthpiece, and I just did everything with those. You just make them work. And these days I have the luxury of loads because I get sent them to do reviews on. But there's plenty of pro players, right, who just have one setup and they make that work.
Yeah, I mean, I had the curse of living 45 minutes outside of New York City when I was growing up. And it was always a treat to go into town, to go to, at that point, on 48th Street in Manhattan, there were a half a dozen, 10 music stores. And we would all go, me and my friends, we would go in and we just trying mouthpieces all day. And, I mean, I gave that up a long time ago. I can't go down that rabbit hole anymore. And there's also this, this desire to check out try to think that because somebody else is using this particular mouthpiece, that you are going to sound like that person if you use that mouthpiece. And I had a lot of people when I was playing with AWB, saxophone players would come up to me and they would say to me, "What kind of mouthpiece are you playing?" And my standard answer was, I'm playing on this, but don't think that if you play on that mouthpiece that you're going to sound like that. And my wife heard me say that to one guy once. She said, "Don't do that. You're supposed to be endorsing those mouthpieces."
It's true, though. Hey, but we are all guilty of that. I mean, I'm sure there's a million golfers in the world that bought the same golf clubs as some famous golfer. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Golf, but,
sure.
So we're all guilty of that. So, right, we've got a bunch of other things to move on with, but first, if you're enjoying the podcast today and you're feeling particularly generous, it would really mean a lot to us if you could just take 5 seconds out of your day and go leave us a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening on today. Maybe even share it with a friend. It'd be really appreciated if you could help us spread the word about the Sax School Online podcast. We certainly like making these episodes, and I hope you're enjoying them too. So, Joel, we've covered a lot of points here. What's the next thing on your list that you see mistakes that members or beginner players are making?
Well, I think it's kind of another variant of kind of what we've touched on already. It's been just generally over-ambitious, I think, and thinking that you're going to get places a lot quicker than you are. Once again, it's really natural thing to want to get to that point further down the road, but there's a process. There's a process to all these things, and you've got to follow the process. It's super important that you do the right things in the right order, and you don't run before you can walk, I think the saying is.
Yeah, I agree with you. We get a question every now and then. I say every now and then, but it actually comes up more often than I'd like to hear this question. And the question is, right, I've decided I'm going to learn saxophone. Exactly, Nigel, how long is it going to take me until I'm going to be a pro saxophone player?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's
my answer to that usually is, how long is a piece of string? That's what I say.
Yeah, I definitely see that all the time, particularly with improvisation. Right, I've decided this year I'd like to play like Stan Getz. It's like, well, it's going to take a little bit longer than a year. These things take a long time. I was talking to a student today actually about a similar thing, and they were just being very down on what they've been playing. They'd done an improvisation and they'd sent me a recording of it, and they were like, "It's terrible. It's the worst thing I've ever done." And actually, it was great. And I had to point out to them, look, you've been working on improvisation for 2 months. And once again, that comparison thing, I'd sent them a recording of me doing a demonstration over it, and they're like, and I said, it's 35 years it's took me to be able to play like that. And you've done this, you're hitting all these anchor chord tone notes and you're playing melodically and you've got a really nice sound. You've done that in 2 months, so I wish I could have done that in 2 months. So I think there's the side of putting time limits on things. You just can't do that with something like learning an instrument, even when it's a case of maybe changing something about your technique, or maybe you want to change your embouchure. You can't say, I'm going to do that by the end of the month. All you can ever be is conscious of what you want to change and be constantly working towards it. And one day you'll become conscious of it and think, am I doing that? And you won't be doing that anymore. It takes as long as it takes. It's about naturalization. It's a bit like saying, I want my child to walk by this date. It's like, it's not going to happen. They'll walk when they're ready to walk. They'll get there, and it'll take maybe quicker than you think. Maybe it'll take a bit longer than you think. But once again, it's about patience.
It is, absolutely. And the other thing that I think is really important to remember if you're at that earlier stages in your learning journey with saxophone is that if you talk to any of the great pro sax players, every single one of them is still on a journey. They're still learning. They're still wanting to improve their skills. I don't think there's many people who are really, pushing ahead with their abilities on saxophone who think, well, that's it. Now I've reached that point. Now I can stop and I'm just going to coast along. I think that's the reality of it. So basically what we're saying is it's a lifelong journey learning saxophone, which is a wonderful thing. And that's something to be embraced. However, though, Fred, I think there's another thing that we see a lot of less experienced players overlook, really. And maybe this kind of ties in with a few of the other things we talked about today with social media and all these sort of things and wanting to learn fancy skills. But don't you think a lot of people overlook the importance of songs?
Absolutely. Yes. It's one of my pet peeves. We talk about this a lot in like the spotlight sessions where members will send in a version of them playing a recording or playing a song that they like or something like that. And I'm always baffled by when I happen to ask somebody, or a student, if they have heard the original version of that song or somebody else's version of it. But it's always best to go back to the original, I find, because it's really the only way you can actually learn. You have to absorb all these things, and it's a language, and you have to hear other people speak it. And if you don't, especially when we talk about, lyrics, that's another thing. Like learn the song, learn the lyrics. It's the best way to really get inside what the song means, and you can't really stress enough how important it is to get all those outside influences, and that's definitely one of them is learning the songs. Yeah,
absolutely. I think there's actually two things in there, Fred. And I agree with you. We do talk about it to members all the time, and I think really it's part of the focus of Sax School. So learning the benefits of learning songs, as in beginning to end, as a performance, and understanding, like you say, the lyrics and the whole mechanism of learning a song as opposed to working through just a bunch of exercises. I really do believe it pulls so many skills together when you look at it as a complete package, as a song. But the other thing that you just touched on there, which I think we should really dig into a bit more, is exploring recordings of people playing those songs. Now, whether that's other saxophone players or vocalists, but spending a lot of time listening. I bet you talk to your guys at the Conservatoire about that a lot, Joel.
Well, all the time. It's one of those things. Sometimes I'll have a student and they seem really passionate about learning jazz, for example, and they'll come for a few lessons and maybe we've got a couple of months in and there doesn't seem to be any progression, but they do seem to be practicing and they do seem to have understood what you've said. But so it becomes a bit confusing why they're not progressing quite as quickly maybe as I'd think. And it's always time to ask the question, what are you listening to at the moment? And the amount of times students have turned around and said well, things that aren't saxophone, basically. They're listening to Radio 2 or something like that. And it's like, well, do you listen to any saxophone players? Are you listening to anybody playing jazz? No, not really. And like Fred said, it's a language. And the best way, if you were learning Spanish, it's got to be really hard to learn Spanish in isolation, not hearing anyone else speak it. And the best way to learn it quickly would be to go to Spain, and the best we can go to gigs and we can listen to recordings, because there's just so many of them out there. If you're learning a tune, listening to all those different versions, all those different interpretations of it. It's just so good to you. It gets you inspired and you start learning the language from a saxophone point of view. That could be articulation and dynamics and even all those kind of technical skills. It all goes in and then it all comes back out again on your saxophone. But without that, your sense of reference or what are you trying to do? You've got nothing to compare to. So it's really important. And it's amazing how often I've discovered that students aren't listening to sax players or, maybe just as importantly, listening to that style that they say they want to learn.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I've got one last point to share with you, actually. But just before we do that, if you're curious to know what we keep talking about on the podcast here about Sax School and how we're helping thousands of players, and you're not already a member, well, guess what? You can actually check it out completely for free. We've got a 14-day free trial that's running as we're recording this. You can go over to saxschoolonline.com and absolutely risk-free, come and explore, sign up and explore all of the lessons that we've got in there. There's thousands of lessons, loads and loads and loads of courses. We do live sessions every month, and we've got masterclasses, and there's just so much to explore. So grab the 14-day trial, see if it suits you, and we'd love to help you. So just to wrap up, one of the things that I see that is a massive roadblock for learners, and it happens with adult learners, particularly busy people who might have been excited about starting saxophone but missed this one crucial point. And it's just not setting a clear schedule and a clear time commitment for learning saxophone. Because learning saxophone is like starting any other habit, I suppose, whether that's a sport habit or a diet habit or a learning habit. Practicing saxophone has to be something that you work into and allocate time for in your weekly schedule. And we find the learners that do that have a little bit of, commitment, even if it's just 3 10-minute sessions a week, even just that, the ones that do have that, they make a massive amount more progress than the ones that do it on an ad hoc basis. Well, I've got no time this week, so I'll just do 1 hour on Sunday, and then maybe in 2 weeks' time I'll do another hour. So really the secret to continual and gradual progress is that regular, consistent practice. And the wonderful thing about it too, and I'm sure you guys find this with your students, is if you can commit to that regular time slot, then you'll be surprised how you'll get momentum and you'll want to do more, and the practice sessions will become longer and more frequent, and it just becomes a habit that you have to do regularly. In fact, we help our students inside Sax School, don't we, guys, with the 30-day challenge, which is, Fred, we see this every week, don't we? The progress that people make with that 30-day challenge.
Absolutely, yeah. It's so important, and like you said, it's almost not about quantity. It's about quality and consistency. So like you said, Nigel, it's so much better, even if you can only do 10 minutes, just the act of that consecutive, progressive, every day, not having to deal with, it's okay, it's Sunday and I haven't played for 5 days. I really don't want to do it. Next thing you know, it's, the day's gone and you haven't done it again. So even just a little bit every day is really going to reap huge rewards, much more than once a week or whatever. Yeah. You can't be, if you're only practicing once a week, you really can't be surprised that you're not making any progress.
Yeah. But on a brighter note. If you do that little schedule, then you'll be surprised at the progress, and I'd love to hear about it. So we've covered a whole load of things today, and I'm curious to know if you've fallen into any of these traps. So if you're listening to this and a couple of those things have rung bells with you, then send us a message, let us know. I'd love to know, or maybe leave us a comment wherever you're listening or watching this episode. So that's it for this week, but if you want to check out other episodes from the Sax School Online podcast, you can find all of them over at saxschoolonline.com/podcast. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time. See ya.